Welcome to Reclaiming Home, a podcast focused on delivering thoughtful conversation and tangible actions to make housing justice a reality in our communities. I'm your host, AsaleSol Young, Executive Director of Housing in Action, an educator, activist, and proud Turtle Papa. I'm a Black legacy native of Evanston, Illinois, and a proud descendant of Haitians and rural Black and Indigenous North Carolinians. Join me as we take time each month to dive into all things housing, including potential policies, community dreams, persistent systemic barriers, neighborhood successes, and anything and everything in between. We're so glad you're joining us.
Here at Housing in Action, we acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that European colonizers stole from the Dakota peoples indigenous to Minnesota. In order for this theft to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, and forced assimilation were employed. We also acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that was cultivated and developed by bodies that European colonizers stole from the West African countries through the transatlantic slave trade. In order for these thefts to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, and forced assimilation were employed. We acknowledge what was taken from our collective human ancestors. As we do so, we commit to work and fight for the liberation of the descendants of those enslaved through American chattel slavery and the sovereignty of all Native American peoples.
Welcome back to Reclaiming Home. Today, I am joined by Aarica Coleman. I am so excited to have this conversation with a longtime colleague and friend. Aarica, I'd love for you to kick off the episode just sharing with us your pronouns, your job title, and the organization that you represent.
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much for having me, AsaleSol. Aarica Coleman, she, her, hers pronouns. I'm president and CEO of Land Bank Twin Cities, Inc., a local nonprofit here in the Twin Cities that is a finance and real estate intermediary.
Indeed, and a longtime partner and supporter of the work we do here at Housing in Action. And as a reminder to those of you that haven't tuned in a while, I'm AsaleSol Young, Executive Director of Housing in Action, they, them pronouns. If you're new to the podcast, Housing in Action is a 31-year-old nonprofit leading the fight for housing justice so that all people have a safe, stable, and dignified place to live. So today, y'all, today our focus is on some of the impacts of the 2008 financial crisis. And I kind of laugh because I recognize where we're at financially today. And we're going to be making some connections to then and now as we get into this conversation with Aarica. But quick background, 2008 financial crisis, often called the Great Recession, led to the 2011 foreclosure crisis and is largely the result of predatory lending through subprime mortgages. Now, subprime loans have higher interest rates, require smaller down payments, lower fees, and are typically larger than prime mortgages or what we know as conventional loans. Typically, banks and mortgage companies offer these loans specifically to low-income buyers who have what we consider lower or poor credit scores. Now, part of the issue here when we talk about housing justice as a racial justice issue is the reality that oftentimes Black families or global majority families were being only offered these loans because lenders were under the assumption that they would default on a conventional mortgage, right? So that's a significant component to this. But you do have, overwhelmingly, there was an increase in the number of families who were able to buy homes through this process because the barrier was lower. And so you have more folks getting mortgages, and mortgage companies were then selling these subprime loans to what we call investment banks. Those investment banks would then sell those mortgages to investors. A lot of people don't realize that the bank can sell your mortgage to an investment firm. I feel like that's not something that people commonly are aware of. So there was this cycle that was being created of we're lending, then we're double selling to investors and they're selling, etc. These were incredibly risky investments to begin with because of the things I outlined earlier, that they were incredibly expensive mortgages. They were outsized mortgages. You know, your conventional mortgage tends to really be reflective of what you can afford. These did not take that into consideration. Um, and so they were incredibly risky investments. So as more folks are getting mortgages, the demand for housing goes up. As demand goes up, development increases. And now you have a scenario where development is actually outpacing the demand. And as that happens, you have more houses on the market, less people are buying the homes. And so interest rates are going up, the homes become less affordable. And so it's kind of like this really unfortunate convergence of financial dynamics operating around housing specifically. Folks start to default on their loans, leading to foreclosures. Investors who had bought these mortgages are watching the market and they're now starting to panic sell those investments, right? So this is that convergence that I'm talking about. So now you have unemployment rates start to go up because typically these investors are corporations. Bankruptcies are spiking and the stock market crashes. So of course, millions of people lose their jobs, their homes, and their savings. And because the United States has such global reach economically, this did have a global impact. At the end of all of this, as we often see today, unfortunately, financial institutions experience very little consequence to this dynamic that they ultimately created. Banks simply sold foreclosed homes or they left them vacant because they didn't need the economic resource. And so now you have millions of vacant properties that were being sold to investment companies. The last piece on this to bring us up to today and really focus on the conversation with our guest. Housing has yet to recover from the impact of the 2011 foreclosure crisis. Outside corporations and corporate investors continue to own a significant portion of real estate in communities all across the United States. However, there continues to be opportunity within the crisis. And so there are efforts to mend what the system broke, including the work that we do, the work here at Housing in Action. During that time, we were able to buy homes at a significantly reduced rate, including a home we bought for $1, y'all, which is crazy. It's a crazy opportunity, but what it meant was that we could buy that home for $1, rehabilitate it, and then sell it at an affordable rate back to the community. And that's what we did. We also used it as an opportunity to create more affordable rental housing. And of course, we were not the only nonprofit doing this work. This is something that really burgeoned in the Twin Cities. And of course, even outside of just housing institutions, you had organizations like the Land Bank that also saw an opportunity to create more equity in a very unequitable and failing market. And so with that, I'm really excited to have Aarica talk to us about how this even led to the concept of the land bank. So Aarica, building off of that, what about that helped to build this innovation that we now call the land bank?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the background in that question. So, first off, I just want to start out Land Bank Twin Cities. We actually were founded in 2009. So we are a direct result, a direct answer, a direct strategy to the 2008 forfeiture and foreclosure crisis that we were seeing. We were started as an initiative of the Family Housing Fund, so we have a long history there. But in 2012, we went out as our own entity as a 501c3 nonprofit. And in 2015, Land Bank Twin Cities, Inc. became the parent company because we do have subsidiaries where we hold real estate or land banking. And so what a land bank typically is it's typically a nonprofit or a government entity, a public entity that has powers solely focused on getting vacant and abandoned properties back to productive use according to community goals. So that is very clear that that is what a typical land bank does and is for. And there are over 300 land banks and land banking programs in the United States.
Wow.
And so Land Bank Twin Cities in particular is not a government entity. We're not a public entity. We are a nonprofit with the sole purpose of operating as long-term civic infrastructure within the 7-county Twin Cities metro area. And so we work at the intersection of land, capital, and community
Mm.
to support equitable real estate and housing outcomes. And so what that looked like in our founding was there were properties that were vacated, whether that was foreclosure, forfeiture, tax forfeiture, and or further down in 2011 that um, impacted North Minneapolis specifically, but it did impact South Minneapolis as well, was a tornado, the twin tornadoes, because they actually were two tornadoes that touched down in both North and South Minneapolis. And it just created a lot of turmoil. However, in real estate, it still created opportunity to rebuild and to allow community to be at that forefront of the rebuilding. Properties were lost, whether that was owner occupied and or rental, because there were a lot of renter occupied properties that were lost between the foreclosure, forfeiture, and tornado crisis. And so how Land Bank Twin Cities operated was using partnerships and support, public subsidy. We work to acquire properties or have those properties conveyed to us. And then we sold them to nonprofits and or emerging developers. Emerging developers didn't have a title then. These are usually historically disadvantaged or kept out populations, uh, Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and Asian and or women own businesses to make sure they have the opportunity to help rebuild the communities in which they live in, work in, and also have a heart for. And so those properties were rehabilitated through our partners and then sold, usually for affordable home ownership. And in affordability, we were looking at 115% area median income and below, with a focus on 80% AMI because of public subsidy. And so we became that vehicle and that mechanism to help move properties because we were buying with cash. We leverage our balance sheet as an organization to make sure that we have access to lines of credit and cash to move quicker and more nimble than what can typically happen when you are trying to do affordable housing.
That's right. That's right. And we of course know that really well as an affordable housing developer. Our funding is typically very slow to acquire. We kind of plan out development projects 2 years in advance to make sure we have the funding necessary. And so opportunities to work with like a land bank is incredibly helpful because it makes us more competitive in the market. And so what I'm hearing from you, Aarica, is that literally the land bank concept was a very direct and very precise response to the inequity that this foreclosure crisis, well, what it was based on and also what it led to. You all and other land banks being able to just buy property quickly away from investors who wanted to compound their like what they were accumulating from this racialized and economic injustice. You all were able to step in and say, actually, no, we're going to turn this around and give it back to the community. I mean, that's incredible. And I think most people don't know that. They don't understand that. And so I'd love for you to even speak to, as you've come into this position, what has been your experience kind of talking to community about the land bank concept? Are people confused? Are they kind of like, okay, I'm down, I dig it. Like, how is that moving?
Yeah. So first off, I have a background in real estate and working in the Twin Cities and being around the Twin Cities. And so when I came to Land Bank Twin Cities, the biggest question I got is, what's that? And I got that question because a lot of people did not know Land Bank Twin Cities exist or what they do or what we do. There is a lot of confusion because our partners in community land trust do great work in affordable housing and affordable ownership. And because we have the word land and land trust is more well known, people assumed we were a land trust. And I'm here to tell you we're not. We're not a land trust. And I often get, well, what's the difference? Well, a community land trust is there to hold the land in trust and or in a community ownership while selling the improvement, which is the built property on there. That allows for affordability because the land is held in a long-term lease state for that homeowner. However, as land bank, when we convey properties, we're conveying 100% ownership. We do not maintain ownership of the land or the structure when we are conveying that. So that's the biggest difference. But I want to be clear, we work with land trusts and we help land trusts because they do align with our mission. And so there's that. But then also for Land Bank Twin Cities, I felt like the sky's the limit. When I understood that this organization was created not in a vacuum, there are many, many individuals and organizations that were at the table around the creation of this organization. Whether they agreed with it or not, they were able to state their viewpoint. And so I think that's super important around how we operate, but that we were created to be able to be, for lack of a better term, sovereign. We are not dependent on public funding. Do we like public funding? Yes, we do. When it aligns with our mission, we will take it. Thank you.
Yes.
But we are not dependent on it. And so being a real estate and finance organization that is mission-based, that's the best way to describe us. And so when I came in and I saw our 3 pillars, strategic acquisition, we buy on behalf of a partner. For whatever reason, they couldn't buy that property at that time. We take title to that property. And if it's a property that can be operated or occupied, we allow that to happen. And then they buy it back from us. So it's a resale agreement, 2 years or less. They buy it back from us. That's strategic acquisition. We have community lending. This is where we do provide new construction acquisition and rehabilitation loan products for housing and commercial real estate. And this is usually to emerging developers and nonprofit partners that aren't able to access funding for a multitude of reasons. And some of it starts with perceived risk from traditional financial institutions. And so we lend to them and we work with other CDFIs and other organizations to look at different opportunities and different deals to further community involvement, community development, but also equitable development by who is kept out and how they get to participate. Yes. And then lastly, land banking. And this is where we just step in and buy property because we are going to disrupt the inequities in the real estate market.
Yes.
So if we see something across the 7-county metro that is prone to speculative development or speculative investor ownership that may not be in the best interest for the community, or allow the community to have time to just say, hey, this is what we want here. This was moving too fast. We'll step in and buy it. And so in practice, when we step in critical moments, we're buying time when traditional systems move too quickly, and land bank when stewardship is required, and we build solutions that align with partners, capital, and long-term community outcomes. And so it doesn't fit in a box.
Exactly. And I love that. And I appreciate you comparing land bank to land trust because I think neither are that commonly understood, frankly. But it is important to understand the difference. And so I kind of almost see these separate engines working toward the same means, right? Like land trust is that, the land is like you said, it's owned by the community for perpetuity. Usually the contracts say, I think, literally 100 years. And the buyer is buying that development. It's buying that property and any rehabilitation done to the property. So that instantly lowers the cost of the purchase for the home. So it's very much focused on the individual family or the individual buyer. Whereas what I hear you saying about land bank is land bank is like a systems level response, and we need both. So this isn't about, like you said, we partner with land trust, like this is all, we're all working for the same means. Um, but this is very systems level. So you are looking at the reality that lower income folks and organizations need patient capital. We need
Yeah.
time, time, time. And
Yes.
communities need that time. Communities need time in a way that's truly focused on, like you said, what is the direction that the community wants to go in. When a bank or an investor buys a property, that's simply about growing their own capital. And usually that money is being extracted, right, from the community. What I hear you saying is you all are coming in to say, okay, we got you until you're ready to move this forward towards an end that contributes and maintains capital within that community. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important for people to understand. So it's like you're working with, which is why you have to essentially work with developers, buyers, like you're working with a whole
Yeah.
swath of folks because you're trying to address the different entry points within the housing system.
Exactly. And that is where another misunderstanding comes about is why we're an intermediary.
Mm.
We step in, we're infrastructure.
Right.
We are not the direct to the consumer, and we're not the ones that are putting it together or starting it. We
Right.
are the gap filler. And I just want to highlight, we also work with investors. And here's what I'm going to tell you about investors. They're also emerging developers. We work with local, community-centered investors who happen to be our emerging developers as well. So we don't keep out of investment ownership, but large, extractive investor ownership, we don't work with that.
Right.
But we don't want, and I'm speaking this way because I want to be very clear that when those that have been historically kept out catch on, then it shifts.
Mhm.
And it's okay to invest and own property and take care of it and be responsible and be caring about the community because you're of that community, because it's
Yes.
still a wealth generation tool.
Yeah, and the reality is that there really is an important difference between investment for self
Yes.
and investment that is for self plus community, right? It's like
Yeah.
that's the key difference.
Yes.
If we're really trying to change things, then it is recognizing kind of, I like to talk about as like the human ancestors. You know, it's like all of our ancestors used to really be about community, the
Yes.
collective.
Yes. And really be honest, that's where land trust comes from.
Yeah.
And so land trust actually came out of the Black community.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's very interesting, and I'm very specific because it was the Black community. It was not just communities of color. Um, so it's interesting to get that history to understand how communal the community has been and is,
Yes.
and how a whole model has come out of that has almost been forgotten or watered down to just be affordable housing for everyone, which
Yeah.
I believe in. And we should also make sure we're recognizing and go back to the roots of why things were created and when they were created and how they're still relevant to this day.
Exactly. And that is even where I see land bank is it's like a systems, again, a systems response, but that calls in our ancestral heritage of collectivism, collective cooperative economics, right? Um, so yeah, this is, I think, really important for us to just lay out for folks, these differences, these nuances. And so I just kind of want to go back to, 'cause to your point about like misconceptions and confusions, like as people are kind of understanding the difference and really even just the the isolated, what is land bank?
Yeah.
Um, Recap for people like the moment when the land goes back into community ownership.
Yeah. So what usually happens is the property, for whatever reason, ended up in title with us. whether that was foreclosure, forfeiture, so us stepping in on vacant properties because those are vacated when it goes through that process, and or a sale. And just a sale that we can step in, we don't have to say who our buyers are. We don't have to say what the reason is. You want to sell it, we're buying it. Um, ends up in our ownership. And so, case in point has been historically with Housing in Action, there have been properties that we have been able to purchase, hold, because at the time, you may have been applying for different funding or subsidy, or you just had other properties under construction, right? You don't need to have that additional added burden of trying to maintain another vacant structure.
That's right.
So we hold it for 2 years or less while we are making sure it's secure, property taxes, utilities, whatever needs to happen, weatherization, whatever needs to happen. And then we sell it. And essentially, our resale agreement is a purchase agreement. Housing in Action signed a purchase agreement with us for an amount to purchase that property and provided earnest money to that agreement. And then we go to the title company, to the closing table, and we sell that property back, which is the structure as well as the land. And then at times, we also provide the loan to Housing in Action to make sure that you are acquiring that property, but rehabbing it as quick as possible, because now it's on your books. And you are selling it for affordable homeownership. Because when we lend our money for housing, we do have a requirement in our loan policies that it has to be at 115% AMI or below. So it's not just being sold for luxury home ownership.
That's right.
And so nobody's creating any more land, right? And so even though we like to talk about the structures, because as human beings, as individuals, that's what we occupy, that's what we see. The most important piece is land, and it is the key economic driver of our country. Real estate. It drives our complete economy. And so at the end of the day, the best way to look at it is we are moving and generating wealth.
That's right.
Back and forth.
That's right. Yeah, I really appreciate that. I love that. It's the handoff and then obviously, like you said, you're making sure that whoever you all are holding land for, that they turn it around at a rate that the community can afford.
Yeah.
Once it's built, it goes back into community ownership. So that's how that works, y'all. For those of you that are really scratching your heads, and I get it, because again, you got land trust, you got land bank, you got affordable housing developers, and it's kind of like, how do all these things fit together? But literally, it's a beautiful weaving of a systemic response to a systemic problem. And that's really exciting, and it's part of what makes the work so fun, because we do get to work with awesome partners like Land Bank to get this done. We don't have to do it alone. They don't have to do it alone. Like, we're all in this together. So for folks who are now like, oh, okay, my mind is blown, I'm getting this, like, I'm comprehending, how do they get involved? Like, if they're a up and coming developer and they're from the community, if maybe they're a nonprofit actually that hasn't developed a relationship with y'all yet, like, how do they get connected?
Absolutely. So there's a few different ways. So for one, we have our website, obviously, landbanktc.org. Can always go to our website and peruse the information. We have our about on there. We have our services, but under services is community lending and strategic acquisition. And really, it's just an opportunity that you can just click the button and say, I just want to learn more, and submit an inquiry. And we can talk to you about the project or the information. We have inquiries that are at all different levels of the development spectrum, whether it's just an idea or whether they actually have a project in the ground and it's stalled because they need some funding right now to get it over that finish line. So, and everything in between. So reaching out that way is one way. There's also some different resources that we have listed on our website for developers as well as for home ownership. And the reason we list those resources is because there's other technical assistance and or entry-level programs that allow you to gain a little bit more information on what is it I want to do and where do I want to do it? Because again, we cover the 7 county metro. And while Minneapolis and St. Paul usually are the largest cities that get most inquiries, there's opportunity in many other cities across the 7 county metro. And so going through developer resources is huge, but and they all will refer back if necessary, like, hey, have you heard of Land Bank Twin Cities? But also homeownership resources. We do get some homeowners that'll reach out, but we refer them to the homeownership center in particular, because that's another partner intermediary that happens to be statewide, but is focused specifically on homeownership. And so those are a couple of ways of being able to contact us or otherwise email info@landbanktc.org and we will respond.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. So we love to end on a positive, like just something uplifting and kind of fun for folks. I would love to know, because you've been doing this work for a long time, Aarica. Like you've been I mean, this is your path. It's your calling. So in that reality, I think it'd be fun for folks to just hear about one of your favorite memories. Like what's like a profound or just something that as you like continue your leadership journey, you kind of hold with you as like a seed or just something that keeps you coming back to that place of hope.
Yeah, wow, that's a good one. Um, Honestly, it's being able to make the possible out of what somebody would call impossible. I am the sum total of the community that raised me, and I believe that I have a responsibility to that community, and that community is right here in the Twin Cities.
Mhm.
Um, there's both physical community, but also relational community that I have. And in thinking about that, what comes to mind is actually something that was in partnership with Housing in Action. And it is a program, a pilot program that was started at the city of Minneapolis as a response to property owner who was losing their rental license. And the properties were predominantly single family properties that were in North Minneapolis, some in South Minneapolis, that were occupied by predominantly women of color or mothers of color head of households.
Mhm.
And there's tools in everybody's toolbox.
Mhm.
However, in the city's toolbox, the tool was to revoke the license and to post the properties as not being able to be occupied, which creates homelessness.
Mhm.
And so that's what was being looked at for these households, 40 plus households. And at the city, in working with other partners and talking to community and neighbors, the city actually started the emergency stabilization pilot program and purchased some properties to house some of those families. I was actually able to manage that program and provide for those rents to be reasonable and affordable. But it was Housing in Action that was one of the leads on us even getting to that point
Mhm.
and then doing the property management as interim and working with the households because the households that ended up occupying those properties went through Housing in Action's process and application process, and y'all were on the front line for us.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the bigger ones that comes to mind. And those properties now um, are being sold to some of those occupants, which is great.
Mhm.
And then others are being sold to a local community minded investor that's going to keep them affordable. And so I bring that up because I can't say for sure Land Bank had a role in that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did. I just wasn't here at that time. Um, But that's that full circle moment, and also of saying how many hands it takes of like-minded individuals and organizations to really move this work forward for the benefit of those that may not have access or have the opportunity to be listened to when they speak up.
That's right. Yes. Wow. Thank you for telling that story, Erica. Like it's really it has been such a joy for me to be in this conversation with you because there are so many connecting pieces
Yeah.
in our careers and Man, and I just, maybe some of our listeners will hear that story and their ears will be like, "Oh, I know who they're talking about. I know what they're talking about." But I just want to emphasize that point of, you know, a lot of times these conversations really start with the community. It starts with folks saying like, "There's a problem here. People are being treated terribly." And being willing to share those stories with a community partner like a Housing in Action, with the city of Minneapolis. And like you said, it's like people who work in these places, they want to hear.
Yeah.
And then we're going to come together and we're going to be like, y'all, we better find this money. We need to figure this out.
Yeah.
And that's just makes the fight so worth it and beautiful and powerful and sustainable, frankly. We
I
could not
agree.
do it alone. So,
Yeah. At the end of the day, I say it's people doing people wrong and it's people doing people right.
yes, love that. Love that. What if that's perfect. We're gonna end there, y'all. Aarica, thank you so much for joining us. This is a
Thank you.
wonderful conversation, and I look forward to more conversations like this with you. It's really been a pleasure. For those of you again who like maybe this is your first podcast with us at Housing in Action, make sure you're following us on all of our social media. We are at Housing in Action across every platform. And we have links to learn more about our topics in our description, whether you listen on Spotify, Apple, any of those places, we'll have links for you there. Aarica, I'd love for you to give your communication pieces for folks one more time and anything you'd like to plug on behalf of Land Bank.
Absolutely. We're landbanktc.org, and we are actually on LinkedIn, Land Bank Twin Cities. But at the end of the day, just make sure you are mentioning Land Bank Twin Cities' name, that you are looking into us, that you are following us, but that you're speaking us in rooms. You never know who might be in that room that would be able to help Land Bank, but that we would be able to help as Land Bank.
There you go. All right, everyone. And with that, we will see you next time. Thank you so much for tuning into Reclaiming Home for today's discussion. If you like this podcast and want to support Housing in Action's work, find us on socials at Housing in Action or visit our website at www.housinginaction.org. Until next time, remain connected and informed.